On New Year's Day 2026, while most football fans were nursing hangovers and recovering from festive celebrations, Chelsea Football Club delivered a bombshell that shocked the football world. Enzo Maresca, the man who had delivered 2 trophies in 18 months and made history at Stamford Bridge, was sacked. He became the first Premier League manager ever to be dismissed on New Year's Day. Just 7 months earlier, Maresca had lifted the Club World Cup, beating Champions League holders PSG 3-0 in the final. Before that, he'd won the Conference League, beating Real Betis 4-1 in Poland, making Chelsea the only club in history to win all 3 current UEFA competitions. He'd taken them back to the Champions League with a 4th-place finish in his debut season. By any metric, his first campaign was a triumph. So what went so catastrophically wrong that Chelsea felt compelled to sack a trophy-winning manager on the first day of the new year? This is the complete story of Enzo Maresca's dramatic rise and spectacular fall at Chelsea Football Club. We'll uncover the secret meetings with Manchester City that betrayed the club's trust, the backstage power struggles over player management, the tactical decisions that turned fans against him, and reveal who's likely to replace him at Stamford Bridge. We'll also examine whether Maresca was truly the problem, or whether he's just the latest victim of a broken system that has now chewed up and spat out 6 managers in less than 3 years. Let's dive in. To understand Enzo Maresca's appointment at Chelsea and why his eventual sacking was so stunning, we need to go back to where it all started, Leicester City. When Maresca took over at Leicester in June 2023, the club was in crisis. They'd just been relegated from the Premier League on the final day of the previous season under Dean Smith, ending a 9-year stay in the top flight. The mood at the King Power Stadium was bleak. Players were leaving. The budget was slashed. Expectations were rock bottom. But Maresca had a plan. The Italian had spent the previous season as Pep Guardiola's assistant at Manchester City during their historic treble-winning campaign. Before that, he'd led City's under-21 side to the Premier League 2 title. He understood possession-based football at the highest level, and he was determined to implement those principles in the championship. It worked spectacularly. Leicester started the season like a house on fire. They won 12 of their first 13 games, becoming only the 3rd team in second-tier history to achieve that feat after Bury in 1894-95 and Bristol City in 1905-06. By late October, they were 5 points clear of second-placed Ipswich and a staggering 14 points clear of Leeds United in 3rd. Maresca won the Championship Manager of the Month award in August after a perfect start. He won it again in October after 6 wins and 15 goals from 6 matches. Then he won it for a 3rd time in December after leading Leicester to end the calendar year at the top of the league with 6 wins and 18 goals from 7 matches. His tactical approach was revolutionary for the championship. He implemented a 4-2-3-1 formation that morphed into a 3-2-5 in possession, with fullbacks inverting into midfield to create numerical superiority. The goalkeeper was actively involved in the build-up, creating overloads from the back. It was Guardiola's philosophy adapted for the second tier, and championship defenders simply couldn't cope with the complexity. Leicester dominated possession, averaging 61.6% across the season. They created 17 big chances in just their first 5 matches. Jamie Vardy, despite being 36 years old, scored 18 league goals. Yet young midfielder Kieran Dewsbury-Hall contributed 12 goals and numerous assists. The team was a well-oiled machine. There were hiccups. A mid-season wobble in February and March saw them win just 4 of 9 games, allowing Ipswich and Leeds to close the gap. Critics questioned whether Maresca could handle the pressure of a promotion race. But he steadied the ship, and Leicester secured promotion on April 26, 2024, when Leeds lost 4-0 to QPR. 3 days later, they won the championship title with a 3-0 victory over Preston, finishing with 97 points from 31 wins, 4 draws, and 11 losses. The relationship between Maresca and his Leicester squad was special. When promotion was confirmed at 10 p.m. on that Friday night, the players could have celebrated anywhere. Instead, at 2 a.m., they all showed up uninvited at Maresca's house. He later called it the best present he received all season, saying he'd never thought as a player to go to his manager's house to celebrate. This was the man Chelsea were hiring, a tactical innovator with fresh ideas, a winner who just delivered a championship title, and someone who clearly commanded respect and affection from his players. Chelsea's decision to hire Maresca in June 2024 raised eyebrows across football. Just days earlier, they'd parted ways with Mauricio Pochettino by mutual consent. Pochettino had finished 6th and reached the League Cup final, losing to Liverpool in extra time. The second half of his season had been strong, with Chelsea having the 4th best league record in the 2024. But it wasn't enough. The board wanted more, and they wanted it delivered in a specific way. Multiple reports suggested that Chelsea's hierarchy, particularly co-owner Behdad Eghbali, felt Pochettino's methods were too traditional. The word used internally was reportedly antiquated. They wanted a modern, progressive coach who embraced data, analytics, and the integrated football leadership structure that Bowley and Clear Lake Capital had implemented. Maresca fit the profile perfectly. At 44 years old, he was young, ambitious, and steeped in Guardiola's positional play philosophy. He wouldn't demand the autonomy that established managers like Pochettino craved. He'd work within the system. He signed a 5-year contract with an option for a further year. He became Chelsea's 5th manager under the Bowley Clear Lake regime in just 2 years, following Thomas Tuchel, Graham Potter, Bruno Saltor, Frank Lampard, and Pochettino. Leicester were devastated. In their official statement, they said they were disappointed that Enzo has decided at this stage that he no longer wants to be part of our vision, noting that the board's terms for his departure had been met. The wording suggested frustration, a sense of abandonment. But Maresca was heading to one of the biggest clubs in world football, and he was determined to make his mark. His first season at Chelsea exceeded all expectations. In the Premier League, Chelsea finished 4th with 69 points from 21 wins, 6 draws, and 11 losses. That was 6 points better than Pochettino's tally the previous season. More importantly, it secured Champions League qualification, the minimum requirement for any Chelsea manager. Defensively, Chelsea significantly improved. They conceded fewer goals than the previous year and looked more organized in their defensive shape. Maresca's preferred 4-4-2 out-of-possession structure, with Cole Palmer dropping alongside Nicholas Jackson to form a front two, proved effective at forcing opponents wide and limiting central penetration. But it was in Europe where Maresca truly announced himself. On May 28, 2025, Chelsea beat Real Betis 4-1 in the Conference League final. It was a dominant performance, with Chelsea controlling possession and creating chances at will. The trophy meant Chelsea had now won the Champions League, Europa League, and Conference League, becoming the first club ever to complete the set of all 3 current UEFA competitions. Then, in July 2025, came the Club World Cup. The newly expanded tournament featured Champions League winners PSG as favorites, but Chelsea dismantled them 3-0 in the final. It was a tactical masterclass, with Maresca's side suffocating PSG's stars and hitting them on the counter with devastating efficiency. 2 trophies, Champions League qualification, a distinct tactical identity, an average age of 23, the youngest squad in the Premier League, showing clear signs of development. By any reasonable standard, Maresca's first season was an unqualified success. When the 2025-26 campaign began, optimism was sky high. Chelsea had just endured the shortest ever break between seasons, just 35 days after lifting the Club World Cup, but fans believed they were finally building something sustainable. Then everything fell apart. To understand why Maresca's Chelsea eventually collapsed, you need to understand his tactical system and why it ultimately proved too rigid. Maresca's approach was sophisticated and complex. On paper, Chelsea lined up in a 4-2-3-1, but in possession, they morphed into a 3-2-5, or even a 2-3-5 depending on the game state. The right back, typically Malo Gusto, would invert into central midfield to create a double pivot with either Moises Caicedo or Enzo Fernandez. The left back, usually Marc Cucurella, had more freedom and would sometimes push all the way forward into a second striker role. This created fascinating dynamics. Chelsea's 2 central midfielders were crucial for breaking opposition defensive lines. They'd operate in staggered positions, one slightly higher than the other, to create passing lanes and disrupt opposing defensive structures. The wingers stayed extremely wide in the build-up phase, stretching the pitch and creating gaps between fullbacks and center backs. Cole Palmer was the key to everything. Deployed as the number 10, he was given freedom to roam, particularly cutting inside from the right half space where his left foot was devastatingly effective. He could shoot, combine with teammates, or play delicate through balls into the channels. In Maresca's first season, Palmer scored 14 of his 15 Premier League goals by mid-January, and only 5 players in the league won possession in the final third more than him. Nicholas Jackson was more than just a goal scorer. His movement was crucial for dragging defenders out of position and creating space for the attacking midfielders. He'd spin defenders, make runs in behind, and drop deep to receive passes, constantly disrupting defensive organization. When it worked, it was beautiful. Chelsea registered the most key passes in the Premier League in Maresca's first 7 games in charge. They scored 16 goals in their first 7 fixtures, with only Manchester City outscoring them. The football was progressive, entertaining, and effective. But there were inherent vulnerabilities in the system. The high defensive line that Maresca insisted on made Chelsea susceptible to balls in behind. The inverted fullback structure sometimes left them exposed in wide areas when transitions broke down. Most critically, the system was possession-dependent. When Chelsea couldn't control the ball, when opponents pressed them effectively, they looked fragile. In his second season, these weaknesses became more apparent. Opponents had studied Chelsea's patterns. They knew that if they pressed Chelsea's double pivot aggressively, they could force errors. They knew that long throws and set pieces exposed Chelsea's organizational issues. They knew that if they hit Chelsea on the counter, the space left by the advanced fullbacks could be exploited. Chelsea dropped 15 points from winning positions across the 2025-26 season, with 13 of those coming at Stamford Bridge. That's the statistic that damned Maresca more than any other. His team couldn't hold leads, whether it was a lack of game management, mental fragility, or tactical naivety. Chelsea repeatedly surrendered winning positions. Against Fulham, they lost a 4.5-month unbeaten home record after leading. Against Ipswich Town, Brighton, and Aston Villa, they failed to see out victories they should have secured. Against Bournemouth in that fateful final match, they conceded from 2 long throws, basic defending that should never happen at this level. The football was often pretty, but it wasn't resilient. And in the Premier League, where momentum and psychology matter as much as tactics, that's a fatal flaw. While tactical issues plagued Chelsea on the pitch behind the scenes, a much more serious conflict was brewing. Maresca's relationship with Chelsea's hierarchy began to deteriorate in late 2025, and the root cause was simple: control. Under the Bewley-Clear Lake ownership model, Chelsea operates with an integrated football leadership structure. The sporting directors, Paul Winstanley and Lawrence Stewart, have significant input on recruitment, squad management, and player development. The medical and sports science teams have authority over injury management and return-to-play protocols. Analytics inform tactical and selection decisions. The manager is one voice among many. This structure was designed to protect Chelsea's massive investment in young talent. Since Bowley took over in May 2022, Chelsea have spent over £1 billion on players, focusing on securing the best young prospects in world football on lengthy contracts. Names like Mykhailo Mudryk, Enzo Fernandez, Moises Caicedo, and Cole Palmer represent enormous financial commitments. The ownership group wanted systems in place to maximize their value and minimize injury risk. Maresca initially accepted this structure, but as the season progressed and results worsened, he began pushing for more autonomy. Multiple sources report that Maresca wanted greater control over player workload management. He felt the medical department was too conservative with return-to-play timelines and training loads. He wanted the freedom to override their recommendations, to decide when a player was ready to return from injury or how much they should train. This created tension with the medical staff, who were following protocols designed to prevent re-injuries and protect long-term player health. In a squad built around young players on massive contracts, the medical team's caution made business sense. But Maresca saw it as interference with his ability to pick his strongest team. The conflict came to a head before the season started when Levi Colwill suffered an injury. Maresca immediately requested a new center-back signing to provide cover. His request was denied. The sporting directors felt the squad was deep enough, and that signing another center-back would block the pathway for younger defenders in the academy or on loan. For Maresca, this was unacceptable. Here was a manager being told he couldn't strengthen his squad in a position where he'd just lost a key player. The message was clear: you'll work with what you have, and you'll work within our structure. By late November and early December, sources suggest Maresca was actively complaining to figures within Chelsea about the lack of support from certain areas of the club. He felt isolated, undermined, and frustrated by a system that limited his authority. Then came the cryptic comments after the Everton match on December 13th. Maresca described the 48 hours before that game as the worst 48 hours of my life. When pressed by journalists to explain, he repeatedly refused to clarify who had failed to support him. He insisted he wasn't criticizing the fans, but he wouldn't say who he was referring to. The vagueness created chaos. Were the players not supporting him? Was the board interfering? Were there internal conflicts about tactics or selection? Speculation ran wild. What we now know is that those 48 hours likely involved confrontations with Chelsea's hierarchy about his demands for more control. Maresca was drawing a line in the sand, making it clear he couldn't work effectively under the current constraints. The ownership didn't budge. They believed their system was right, that it would produce long-term success even if it meant short-term manager turnover. Maresca was replaceable. The system wasn't. This fundamental disconnect, this clash between a manager wanting traditional authority and owners wanting collective decision-making, would ultimately seal Maresca's fate. But there was one more factor that made his position completely untenable: Manchester City. Here's where this story takes its most explosive turn, and why Chelsea felt they had no choice but to sack Maresca. On January 1st, just hours after Chelsea announced Maresca's departure, The Athletic's David Ornstein dropped a bombshell. Maresca had informed Chelsea on 3 separate occasions that he was in talks with Manchester City about potentially replacing Pep Guardiola. Let that sink in. The Chelsea manager, under contract until 2029, told his employers 3 times that he was discussing their Premier League rivals' managerial vacancy. Not after the season ended, not during a designated negotiation period, during the middle of a campaign where Chelsea were fighting for Champions League qualification. The timeline is damning. The first 2 conversations happened in late October 2025. Chelsea were in decent form, sitting comfortably in the top 4. Then suddenly, inexplicably, results started to deteriorate. From early November through December, Chelsea won just one of their next 7 Premier League matches. The timing was suspicious. Then, in mid-December, just days after making those cryptic worst 48 hours comments following the Everton match, Maresca informed Chelsea for a 3rd time that he'd been talking to people associated with Manchester City. Now, contractually, Maresca was obligated to disclose these conversations. His agents likely insisted he notify Chelsea to avoid any potential legal issues. But the fact that he was entertaining discussions with City at all while Chelsea's season hung in the balance was absolutely staggering. The context makes it even worse. Manchester City were drawing up contingency plans for the summer of 2026, anticipating that Guardiola might not extend beyond the final year of his contract. There was growing speculation that the legendary manager might walk away, perhaps to take a national team job or a new challenge elsewhere. Maresca had deep connections at City. He'd worked as their U21 coach in the 2020-21 season. Then he returned as Guardiola's assistant for the entire 2022-23 treble-winning campaign. He clearly had admirers at the Etihad, including Guardiola himself, who had publicly called Maresca one of the best managers in the world, and praised the job he'd done at Chelsea. For Maresca, the City job represented a dream opportunity. He'd be returning to a club where he had relationships, working with better players, and most importantly, stepping into a structure where the manager had far more authority than at Chelsea. Guardiola essentially runs Manchester City's football operations. There's no integrated leadership structure limiting his power. The manager is king. The problem? Maresca was already employed by Chelsea, and he was discussing a move to their direct competitor while his team was underperforming. When journalists confronted Maresca about the City links in mid-December, he emphatically denied them. He called the reports 100% speculation and insisted, "I have a contract here until 2029. I'm focused on my job. I'm very proud to be here." But Chelsea knew the truth. They knew about all 3 disclosure conversations. They knew Maresca was lying to the media, to the fans, and possibly to his own players. They knew his head was already at Manchester City, even as he stood on the touchline at Stamford Bridge. Chelsea's hierarchy felt utterly betrayed. They'd hired Maresca, backed him with resources, supported him through difficult moments, and allowed him to manage one of the biggest clubs in world football. In return, he was secretly planning his exit to their rivals. Some figures at Stamford Bridge believed this explained Chelsea's collapse. How could a manager be fully committed to results when he was already mentally preparing for his next job? How could players trust a manager whose loyalty was clearly elsewhere? How could the board invest in a long-term project with someone who saw Chelsea as a stepping stone? The Manchester City situation transformed this from a performance-based sacking into something more personal. This wasn't just about dropped points or tactical failures. This was about trust, loyalty, and professionalism. Chelsea felt Maresca had violated all 3. And that's why, when the Bournemouth debacle provided the perfect catalyst, Chelsea pulled the trigger immediately. New Year's Day, a historic first, a clear message to future managers. We can accept poor results, but we cannot accept disloyalty. The night of December 30th, 2025, will be remembered as the moment everything finally imploded for Enzo Maresca at Chelsea. Bournemouth arrived at Stamford Bridge without a win in 9 matches. They were in free fall, mired in a relegation battle, desperate for points. This was the definition of a must-win game for Chelsea. Instead, they delivered a performance that perfectly encapsulated all their problems: tactical vulnerability, defensive fragility, and catastrophic decision-making. The match was chaotic from the start. All 4 goals came in a frantic opening 27 minutes. David Brooks gave Bournemouth an early lead, stunning the home crowd. Palmer equalized from the penalty spot, briefly restoring order. Enzo Fernandez then fired Chelsea ahead with a brilliant long-range strike, and suddenly it looked like the crisis might be averted. But then came the moment that symbolized everything wrong with Chelsea's season. Another long throw from Bournemouth, another defensive catastrophe, and Justin Kluivert leveled the score. 2-2 at home against a team in crisis. The boos began immediately. Chelsea desperately chased a winner in the second half. The attacking play showed flashes of quality, but there was no cutting edge, no killer instinct, no ability to break down a Bournemouth side that had set up with everyone behind the ball. Then in the 63rd minute, Maresca made the decision that sealed his fate. He substituted Cole Palmer. The reaction was immediate and ferocious. Stamford Bridge erupted. Boos rained down from every corner of the stadium. "You don't know what you're doing." The chant echoed around the ground, directed squarely at the manager. Season ticket holders who'd supported the club for decades were openly jeering their own manager. Maresca's logic was understandable in isolation. Palmer was returning from a groin injury that had kept him out of previous matches. Chelsea had a crucial fixture against Manchester City coming up in just a few days. Protecting your star player's fitness makes sense in theory, but the optics were catastrophic. You're at home. You're drawing with Bournemouth, a team fighting relegation. You desperately need a goal, and you remove your best player, the one man most likely to create something from nothing? To save him for a match against City that most fans expected Chelsea to lose anyway, given their current form? It looked like surrender. It looked like a manager prioritizing future fixtures over the present. It looked like someone who had lost his conviction, his confidence, his ability to make bold decisions. When the final whistle blew at 2-2, the boos intensified. This wasn't just frustration with one substitution. This was months of accumulated disappointment, confusion, and anger boiling over. Fans had watched their team drop points from winning positions repeatedly. They'd endured cryptic comments from their manager. They'd seen rumors about Manchester City. They'd witnessed tactical rigidity and defensive fragility. Now they'd watched their manager take off their best player in a home game they needed to win. It was the breaking point. Then Maresca delivered the final act. He didn't show up for the post-match press conference. His assistant Willy Caballero appeared instead, explaining that Maresca was feeling unwell and had a temperature. Caballero defended the Palmer substitution, defended Maresca's professionalism, and tried to project stability. But nobody believed the illness excuse. Not after being booed by your own fans. Not in the midst of crisis talks about your future. Not when everything was falling apart. It looked like avoidance, like a manager who couldn't face the music. Chelsea insiders later revealed what really happened. Maresca had a heated confrontation with a senior figure at the club immediately after the match. The conversation was frank, probably brutal. The situation had become untenable, and everyone knew it. Within 48 hours, Chelsea made it official. Enzo Maresca was sacked. To truly understand Maresca's sacking, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because this isn't just about one manager failing. This is about a system that has now failed 6 managers in less than 3 years. Enzo Maresca became the 6th manager sacked under the Bowley-Clearlake regime since they took over in May 2022. Think about that number. 6 managers in 32 months. That's an average tenure of just over 5 months per manager. Let's go through them. Thomas Tuchel was sacked in September 2022, just 7 games into the season. Tuchel had won the Champions League with Chelsea in 2021, reached 2 domestic cup finals, and finished 3rd in the league. But his relationship with Bowley deteriorated over transfer decisions and communication style. The ownership felt Tuchel was moody, difficult to work with, and resistant to their vision of collective leadership. He lasted just 3 months under the new regime. Graham Potter was hired from Brighton for a record £21.5 million compensation fee, making him the most expensive manager in football history. He was given a 5-year contract and initially won 5 of his first 6 games. But results soon collapsed. Chelsea finished the season in 12th place, and Potter was sacked in April 2023 after just 7 months, having won only 12 of his 31 matches. The diplomatic, flexible approach that appealed to ownership proved ineffective on the pitch. Bruno Saltor served as interim manager for exactly 1 match, a 0-0 draw against Liverpool. He was never a serious candidate for the permanent role. Frank Lampard returned for a second spell as caretaker manager to see out the season. It was a disaster. Chelsea won just 1 of their final 11 matches under Lampard, cementing their worst ever Premier League finish. Lampard had no interest in the permanent role, and Chelsea had no interest in offering it. Mauricio Pochettino was appointed in July 2023 after an extensive search. He had a difficult start, winning just 3 of his first 10 league games, but the second half of the season showed a real improvement. Chelsea had the 4th best league record in 2024, reached the League Cup final, and there was a sense of growing cohesion. Pochettino was sacked anyway. Reports suggest co-owner Behdad Eghbali felt his methods were antiquated and wanted a more progressive, data-driven coach. Pochettino lasted exactly 1 season, and now Enzo Maresca, despite winning 2 trophies and securing Champions League qualification in his first season, has been sacked after just 18 months. The pattern is clear, and it's damning. These aren't all bad managers. Tuchel is a Champions League winner. Pochettino has managed PSG and Tottenham. Potter was one of the most highly rated coaches in English football. Maresca had just won the championship title and delivered European trophies for Chelsea. Yet they all failed under this ownership structure. They all struggled with the same fundamental issues: lack of autonomy, interference in squad management, pressure to work within a collective leadership structure that limits managerial power, unrealistic expectations given the constant squad turnover, and a revolving door culture that prevents any long-term project from taking root. Compare this to the Abramovich era. Roman Abramovich was famously trigger-happy with managers, but at least there was a clear philosophy. He hired elite managers like Jose Mourinho, Carlo Ancelotti, and Antonio Conte. He demanded success. If they didn't deliver trophies, they were sacked. It was ruthless but logical. The Bowley Clear Lake philosophy is murkier. They've focused on hiring relatively inexperienced coaches who they believe will work within their integrated football leadership structure. They want grateful managers who won't push back too hard on ownership decisions. They prioritize youth development and long-term squad building over immediate success. But here's the fundamental problem. If you hire 6 different managers and they all struggle with the same issues, at what point do you look at the system itself? When Thomas Tuchel clashed with ownership over control, it was easy to blame his personality. When Graham Potter failed, you could point to his lack of experience at this level. When Pochettino was sacked despite improvement, you could argue they wanted a more modern coach. When Maresca has secret talks with Man City and results collapse, you can blame his disloyalty. But 6 managers? That's not a personnel problem anymore. That's a structural problem. Chelsea supporters are left asking a simple question. Will any manager succeed under this ownership model? Or is the system itself fundamentally broken? So Chelsea needs a new manager, and they need one immediately. They're 5th in the Premier League, just 2 points off the top 4, but only 7 points clear of 15th. They're in the semi-finals of the Carabao Cup. They're still competing in the Champions League. The season is very much alive, and Chelsea can't afford an extended managerial search. According to multiple reports, one name has emerged as the clear frontrunner, Liam Rosenior. If your immediate reaction is who, then you're not alone. Rosenior is not a household name. He's currently managing Strasbourg in League One, where he's done impressive work, guiding them to 7th place and securing European qualification. But this would represent a massive, massive step up. Here's why Chelsea wants him. Strasbourg is owned by Blueco, the same multi-club ownership group that controls Chelsea. Rosenior is already part of the family. He understands the Blueco philosophy, he's worked within their structure at Strasbourg, and crucially, he won't demand the kind of autonomy that created problems with Maresca. Rosenior is 41 years old. His managerial career has been modest. He had a brief interim spell at Derby County. He then spent 2 seasons at Hull City, nearly getting them into the championship playoffs in his 2nd season, before being sacked in the summer of 2024. The official reason was disagreements with the owner over playing style, but it left Rosenior unemployed and available when Strasbourg came calling. At Strasbourg, Rosenior has implemented a clear tactical identity, focused on developing young players within a structured framework. He emphasizes possession-based football, pressing intensity, and player development. Strasbourg plays attractive football, and Rosenior has earned praise for his communication skills and modern coaching methods. Chelsea's decision-makers are impressed. They believe Rosenior represents the future of coaching. Young, progressive, tactically sophisticated, comfortable with data and analytics, and willing to work collaboratively within a multi-club structure. But there's an obvious problem. This would be an absolutely massive step up. Going from Strasbourg, where expectations are modest and pressure is manageable, to managing Chelsea, one of the biggest clubs in world football, with intense media scrutiny, demanding fans, and a board that has now sacked 6 managers in 3 years. That's an enormous risk. Some might argue it's the exact same gamble Chelsea made with Graham Potter, and we all remember how that ended. Potter went from Brighton, where he was building something special with time and support, to Chelsea, where he was given no time and folded under the pressure within 7 months. Will Rosenior be any different? Does he have the personality, the experience, the tactical flexibility to handle the Chelsea job? Other names are being mentioned in reports. Oliver Glasner at Crystal Palace is well regarded and his contract expires this summer. Cesc Fabregas is doing excellent work at Como and has Chelsea connections. Francesco Farioli from Porto has impressed many observers. Roberto De Zerbi and Andoni Iraola remain highly rated within the game. But reports suggest Chelsea are unlikely to pursue these more established names. They want someone who fits their model, someone who will accept the integrated leadership structure, someone who won't rock the boat. That person appears to be Liam Rosenior. Sky Sports is reporting that Chelsea expects to announce Maresca's successor within days. The speed of the process suggests they had contingency plans ready and that Rosenior has already been identified as their top target. One Chelsea insider was quoted as saying, "They want someone who understands the journey we're on, who shares our long-term vision, and who will embrace the collaborative approach to football operations." Translation: We want someone who won't fight us for control. Whether that's the right approach remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. Liam Rosenior will be walking into one of the most challenging jobs in football at a club where patience is non-existent, and the structural issues that have defeated 6 managers before him remain unresolved. So here we are at the end of this extraordinary story. Enzo Maresca, the man who won 2 trophies in 18 months, who made Chelsea the first club to win all 3 UEFA competitions, who delivered Champions League qualification in his debut season, is out of work on New Year's Day. His downfall came from a perfect storm of factors. There were tactical issues, the inability to hold leads, dropping 15 points from winning positions, and defensive fragility that saw Chelsea concede from basic set pieces and long throws. There were the power struggles, Maresca's demands for more autonomy over player management, his conflicts with the medical staff, and his frustration with a system that limited managerial authority. There were the cryptic comments, the worst 48 hours remarks that created an atmosphere of suspicion and instability, and the public complaints about a lack of support. Most damaging of all, there were the secret Manchester City meetings. 3 separate instances where Maresca told Chelsea he was discussing their rival's vacancy, creating the perception that his loyalty was elsewhere and his focus was divided. And finally, there was the Bournemouth debacle. The 2-2 draw, the Cole Palmer substitution, the fans booing their manager, and Maresca's absence from the post-match press conference. It was the perfect catalyst for a decision Chelsea's hierarchy had likely already made. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Was Enzo Maresca really the problem? Yes, he made tactical mistakes. Yes, talking to Manchester City was unprofessional. But he also delivered 2 trophies and Champions League qualification with the youngest squad in the Premier League. When you've cycled through 6 managers in 32 months, when Tuchel, Pochettino, and now Maresca all fail, the problem isn't the managers, it's the system. Chelsea fans are facing their 7th manager in 3 years. The constant turnover prevents any project from taking root. As for Maresca, his career will survive. The Leicester miracle and the trophies are real. For Chelsea, the cycle continues. Maybe the 7th manager will crack the code. However, if history is any guide, we will likely be back here in 12 to 18 months, analyzing another sacking. Enzo Maresca won everything, only to lose it all. But Chelsea lost something too. Stability, credibility, and the faith of their supporters. Thanks for watching this deep dive into one of the most dramatic managerial sagas in recent Premier League history. What do you think? Was Chelsea right to sack Maresca? Or is the ownership structure the real problem? Was the Manchester City situation unforgivable, or should Chelsea have shown more patience? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video informative, smash that like button and subscribe for more in-depth football analysis. The debate around Chelsea's direction is far from over, and I'll be covering all developments as this story unfolds.